The desert sun was merciless, bleaching the horizon into a haze of gold and dust. I was stationed in a remote outpost, a soldier in a war zone half a world away from my quiet suburban home in Willow Creek, Nevada. My name is Captain Ethan Caldwell, and for 8 months my focus was survival, dodging ambushes, leading my squad, and counting the days until I could return to my wife Sarah and our 2 kids. I had no idea that back home a different kind of battle was brewing, one that would pit me against a homeowners association drunk on power and greed. Before deploying, I'd left everything in order. Our 3-acre plot, nestled at the edge of the Willow Creek subdivision, was paid off, taxes up to date, and entrusted to Sarah, who was juggling her job and the kids while I was gone. The HOA, led by a self-important realtor named Gregory Vance, had always been a nuisance, fining us for untrimmed hedges or an unpainted mailbox, but we complied to keep the peace. I never imagined they'd cross a line so egregious it would unravel their entire operation. It started with a letter Sarah forwarded to me, barely legible through the static of a spotty satellite connection. The HOA claimed our land was abandoned and, citing some obscure bylaw, had sold it to a developer for a strip mall. They argued that since I was overseas and Sarah hadn't attended their mandatory meetings, our property was forfeit. No notice, no court order, just a swift transaction that netted them a tidy profit. Sarah was devastated, fighting eviction notices while raising our children alone. The betrayal burned hotter than the desert sun. I contacted my commanding officer, Colonel Ramirez, who connected me with a JAG lawyer, Major Elena Torres. She was a bulldog in uniform, with a reputation for dismantling bureaucratic nonsense. "Ethan," she said, her voice crackling over the line, "this isn't just a civil issue. If they falsified documents or exploited your deployment, it's a violation of federal law under the Service Members Civil Relief Act." She promised to dig deeper, and I trusted her to wage war on my behalf while I focused on staying alive. Back home, Sarah rallied our neighbors, many of whom were fed up with the HOA's overreach. The subdivision, once a haven of tidy lawns and cul-de-sacs, had become a fiefdom under Vance's rule. He'd raised dues to exorbitant levels, imposed fines for minor infractions, and funneled the money into shady community projects. Our case became a rallying cry. Sarah organized meetings, and soon a dozen families were sharing stories of harassment and extortion. They formed a coalition, calling themselves the Willow Creek Resistance, and began documenting the HOA's abuses. Major Torres uncovered a paper trail that was as damning as it was brazen. The HOA had forged documents claiming I'd defaulted on dues I'd never owed. They'd exploited a loophole in their bylaws, falsely declaring our property abandoned despite Sarah's presence. Worse, they'd colluded with a developer, who was none other than Vance's cousin, a conflict of interest that reeked of corruption. Torres filed a federal lawsuit, citing violations of the SCRA and fraud. But she didn't stop there. She reached out to contacts at the Department of Defense, leveraging the weight of my service to escalate the matter. By the time I returned stateside, the situation had exploded. The lawsuit had frozen the HOA's accounts, and the developer's strip mall project was halted. Vance, smug as ever, underestimated the storm he'd unleashed. At a community meeting, he tried to dismiss the allegations, claiming the sale was for the greater good. Sarah, standing at the podium with fire in her eyes, read aloud the forged documents, exposing his lies to a room of furious residents. The crowd erupted, demanding accountability, but the real turning point came when the military got involved. Colonel Ramirez, a man who didn't tolerate injustice, had connections that reached higher than I'd ever imagined. He'd alerted a Pentagon liaison who oversaw service member protections, and they took an interest in our case. The DoD, in a rare move, coordinated with federal marshals to investigate the HOA's broader financial dealings. What they found was a cesspool of embezzlement, tax evasion, and fraudulent property transfers. Not just ours, but others in the subdivision. The feds didn't just stop at fines or lawsuits. They invoked an obscure clause in federal law, tied to eminent domain and military oversight, that allowed them to seize assets linked to systemic fraud against service members. The entire Willow Creek subdivision, built on land originally acquired through a federal grant, was deemed under military jurisdiction due to the HOA's violations. In a stunning move, the Department of Defense repossessed the subdivision's common areas, clubhouse, pool, parks, and placed them under temporary military administration. The message was clear: mess with a soldier's family and you'll face the full weight of the US government. Vance and his cronies were arrested, charged with fraud, conspiracy, and violations of the SCRA. The developer's contract was voided, and our land was restored to us, free and clear. The residents, emboldened by the victory, voted to dissolve the HOA entirely, replacing it with a cooperative council that prioritized transparency and fairness. Sarah, hailed as a hero, was elected its first chair. I'll never forget the day I walked back onto our property. The kids ran to me, their laughter echoing across the acres we'd fought so hard to keep. Sarah wrapped her arms around me, and for the first time in months, I felt whole. The subdivision, once a battleground, was quieter now, its streets lined with neighbors who'd found their voice. The clubhouse, now managed by a military liaison, flew an American flag alongside a banner reading, "Willow Creek United." As I stood on our porch, watching the sunset paint the Nevada sky, I thought about the cost of service, not just overseas but at home. The HOA had underestimated us, thinking a soldier's absence was a weakness. They didn't count on Sarah's strength, our neighbors' resolve, or the military's reach. We'd reclaimed more than our land, we'd reclaimed our community. And somewhere in a cell awaiting trial, Gregory Vance was learning a hard lesson. You don't mess with a soldier's home and expect to walk away unscathed.